My son laid a hand on me inside my own kitchen, and the moment his palm connected with my arm, something inside me didn't break. It awakened. It wasn't the force of the blow because truth be told it wasn't hard. It was small, quick, more like a frustrated gesture than an attack. But disrespect carries a weight that bruises deeper than any strike. The pan on the stove sizzled loudly, drowning the awkward silence that followed. He stepped back, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling like a child trying to regain control after throwing a tantrum. Except he wasn't a child anymore. He was a grown man, taller than me, broader than the doorway he leaned against, his eyes sharp with misplaced anger, an anger that had been festering inside him for months, maybe years. I didn't react. Not with shock. Not with outrage. Not even with words. I simply looked at him with a quiet, steady gaze that made him shift uncomfortably. He expected yelling, drama, confrontation, something to match the storm inside him. But silence was more powerful than anything I could have said. He swallowed, turned away, and muttered something under his breath. Something about me pushing him too far. Something about just being tired. Something about everyone expecting too much. Excuses. Thin excuses that once might have softened me, but not anymore. Not after everything I had carried, forgiven, ignored, and endured from the boy I raised with these very hands he had just used against me. He stomped out of the kitchen, leaving the air behind him heavy and trembling with unspoken words. I stirred the pot of soup slowly, my hands steady. Not because I was unaffected, but because I had already decided something long before that moment. That slap didn't make my decision. It simply confirmed that I had waited too long to act. That night he ate quietly. No eye contact. No apology. No acknowledgement. He thought silence meant acceptance. He thought because I didn't scream I surrendered. He thought because I didn't cry I cowered. And when he went to bed, slamming his door like a rebellious teenager instead of a man in his 30s, I sat alone at the dining table, tracing the lace edges of my old tablecloth, the one his grandmother had given me, the one I kept for important days. And tonight was important, though he didn't know it yet. I made a phone call. A long overdue one. The kind of call a mother makes when she has watched her child turn into someone unrecognizable. Someone who forgot respect. Someone who forgot gratitude. Someone who forgot who raised him. And the person I called did not hesitate. They said, "I'll be there first thing in the morning." I didn't sleep that night. Not out of fear, but out of reflection. Memories flooded my mind. The day he was born. The way he learned to walk gripping my finger. The nights I stayed awake while he had fevers, the sacrifices I made so he could feel secure, fed, and loved. How had that little boy grown into a man who thought raising a hand at his mother was acceptable? Was it my fault for giving too much? Was it his weakness? Was it the people he surrounded himself with? Or was it the world that convinced him masculinity meant dominance? I didn't know. But I knew I was done letting him treat me like I was beneath him. Morning came quietly. The soft light stretched across the living room floor, touching the dining table where I had set everything perfectly. The lace tablecloth was smoothed out, the chairs arranged neatly. I sat at the head of the table, the place I rarely sat unless guests came. My heart wasn't heavy. It wasn't afraid. It was ready. Ready for him to finally face someone who wouldn't tolerate the version of himself he had become. I heard his footsteps coming down the stairs, slow at first, then quicker as he smelled the breakfast I had cooked. His favorite, something I hadn't made in months. Maybe he thought today would be normal. Maybe he believed last night's disrespect had already been forgotten. Maybe he assumed I was still the same mother who swallowed pain for the sake of peace. But when he turned into the dining room, everything inside him froze. His eyes widened. His shoulders tensed. His mouth fell slightly open as if he saw a ghost sitting across the table. Because the person waiting for him wasn't just me. It was someone whose very presence demanded accountability. Someone he feared. Someone he respected in a way he had forgotten how to respect me. I sat still, smoothing the lace tablecloth again as if nothing unusual was happening. But my son stood at the edge of the doorway looking like a man who had just realized the world wasn't as small and safe for him as he believed. He hadn't expected this confrontation. Not today. Not like this. And in that moment, watching him swallow hard, watching the panic flicker across his face, watching the arrogance drain out of him, I knew. Today the real reckoning begins. My son stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the figure seated at my dining table, and for a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself. The man sitting across from me was not just any guest. He was the one person my son had spent his entire adult life trying and failing to impress. The one man he feared disappointing. The one voice that still echoed in his head whenever he made a bad decision. His uncle. His father's older brother. A man my son respected more than anyone else in the world, including me. He sat upright, suit jacket perfectly pressed, silver hair combed neatly back, eyes sharp with the quiet authority of someone who had seen life without blinking. His presence alone changed the temperature of the room. My son's breath caught in his throat as he stepped inside, unable to mask the sudden vulnerability in his posture. The same boy who stomped around my house the night before like he owned the ground beneath his shoes now looked like a child again. Small, guilty, unsure. For a long moment none of us spoke. The silence between us felt deliberate, heavy, as though waiting for my son to fill it with whatever apology or excuse he thought might save him from judgment. He stood there awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, then hiding his hands behind his back like a guilty schoolboy caught misbehaving. His uncle's gaze never wavered. He didn't smile, didn't soften, didn't offer comfort. He simply stared at my son with a calm intensity that peeled back every layer my son used to hide behind. Anger, pride, ego, entitlement. All of it evaporated under that gaze. "Sit down," his uncle finally said. Two simple words, spoken quietly but carrying the weight of a command. My son obeyed instantly, not out of fear but out of respect, out of the deep-rooted understanding that this was not a man you lied to or argued with. He pulled out the chair slowly, head bowed slightly, and sat across from the one man who, without raising his voice, could dismantle him. I watched quietly, my hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea, outwardly calm but inwardly battling 1,000 emotions. Anger, sadness, relief, and a quiet hope that this intervention would finally make him see what I could not make him understand alone. His uncle leaned back slightly, studying him. "Your mother called me," he said, voice firm but steady. "She doesn't call unless it's serious." My son swallowed hard. His uncle continued. "She told me you put your hands on her." The words landed like a blow. My son opened his mouth, perhaps to deny it, perhaps to justify it, but his uncle held up a hand. "Don't speak yet. I want to see if you understand the gravity of what you've done." My son lowered his head, lips pressed tightly together. His shoulders slumped, shame creeping up his neck in a slow, visible flush. His uncle leaned forward, elbows on the table, his voice lowered to a tone so controlled it felt like the air itself tightened around his words. "Your father was my brother. He was a proud man. A flawed man at times, but one thing he never did, never, was raise a hand at your mother." My son flinched slightly. His uncle's voice grew heavier. "When he died, I promised myself I would watch over both of you. I thought you would honor his memory. But then I received her call and I realized something. You've forgotten who you are. You've forgotten where you come from." My son blinked rapidly, struggling to hold back tears he didn't want to show. His uncle didn't ease up. "Your mother raised you alone. She sacrificed her youth, her opportunities, her comfort so you could become a man. And last night, you repaid her with your hand." The shame on my son's face deepened into something that looked dangerously close to breaking. His uncle wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His calmness was more powerful than any shouting could ever be. My son finally whispered, barely audible, "I'm sorry." His uncle's jaw tightened. "Sorry means nothing," he said coldly. "You need to understand why what you did is not only wrong, it's unacceptable." My son nodded quickly, like a child desperate for forgiveness, eyes shining with unshed tears. His uncle continued, voice softening but never losing its firmness. "Your anger does not give you power. It exposes your weakness. Men who cannot control their emotions end up destroying the people who love them most." My son's chest shuddered slightly, his breathing uneven. He looked at me, then really looked at me for the first time in months. His face crumpled. "Mom," he whispered, voice trembling. "I'm so sorry." He reached for my hand timidly, as though unsure if he had the right. And I let him hold it. Not because I had forgotten the hurt, but because I had waited years for the moment he would finally see me not as a punching bag for his frustrations but as the mother who had kept him alive through every storm. His uncle's eyes softened just a fraction as he watched us. "She didn't call me to punish you," he said. "She called me to save you." My son wiped a tear quickly, embarrassed to let it fall. "Save me?" he whispered. His uncle nodded. "From becoming a man you'd be ashamed to be. From becoming the kind of person who ends up alone, angry, and full of regret." The dining room fell silent again. But this time the silence was not heavy with shame. It was full of possibility. A chance. A doorway to change. My son bowed his head deeply, his voice cracking as he whispered, "I want to be better. I don't want to be this person." His uncle nodded once. "Good. Then today is the day you start." I sat there quietly, smoothing the lace tablecloth again, feeling something shift in the room. Something real, something fragile, something hopeful. The reckoning had begun. But the healing was about to start too. After the weight of his uncle's words settled over the room, the morning air felt different, thicker somehow, as if the truth hanging between us had altered the atmosphere itself. My son sat at the table, shoulders folded inward, fists tight but trembling slightly, like a man wrestling with the version of himself he never wanted to face. His uncle watched him with steady eyes, unblinking, offering no escape from the mirror he had forced him to look into. I stayed quiet, letting the silence do what words couldn't. And in that silence my son took his first deep breath in what felt like years. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the frustration, the guilt, the remnants of the person he didn't want to be anymore. But change, real change, always comes with pain. His uncle straightened in his chair and spoke again, his tone gentler but still firm enough to command respect. "I'm not here just to lecture you," he said. "I'm here to understand what led you to this point." My son hesitated, eyes darting to me for reassurance. For the first time in a long while there was no anger in his gaze, only vulnerability. He took another breath, then finally whispered, "I've been drowning." His uncle raised an eyebrow slightly. "In what?" It took a moment before my son found the courage to speak again. "In bills, in mistakes, in anger, in feeling like a failure. I didn't want Mom to see it. I didn't want anyone to see it." He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once held mine when he learned to walk. And every time I felt cornered, I lashed out. His voice cracked at the end of the sentence, and I could tell he was fighting tears he didn't want to show. His uncle nodded slowly, absorbing every word without judgment. "Being overwhelmed doesn't give you permission to hurt the people who love you," he said softly. "But admitting you're overwhelmed, that's where rebuilding starts." My son nodded, ashamed but listening. "I know," he whispered. "I know I've been unfair. I know I've treated you badly, Mom." His voice broke on the word Mom, and when he finally lifted his eyes toward me, they were filled with regret so deep it nearly stopped my breath. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently on his. He flinched, not from fear but from guilt, but then relaxed slowly, like someone desperate for forgiveness but afraid he didn't deserve it. "You're my son," I said quietly, "and I'll always love you. But love doesn't mean letting you destroy yourself. Or destroy me." The truth of those words settled over him like a soft but undeniable weight. His uncle exhaled, leaning back. "There's something else you need to understand," he added. "Your father, he wasn't just my brother. He was my responsibility too. I made a promise to him before he died, to look after this family." My son swallowed hard. That promise hung in the room like a silent witness to everything happening now. "And that's why I'm here," his uncle continued. "Not to punish you. To catch you before you fall so far that you can't climb back." My son wiped at his eyes again, but this time he didn't hide it. "I don't want to be like this anymore," he said. "I don't want to be angry all the time. I don't want to take it out on the one person who's always been there for me." I felt a tightness in my chest, not from pain, but from the fragile courage it takes for a grown man to say those words. His uncle nodded, approving but still serious. Good, he said. Because I'm not leaving today. My son blinked, startled. You're staying. His uncle smirked slightly. If I walk out of this house now, you'll fall right back into old patterns by sunset. Change doesn't happen in an hour. It happens with accountability. My son nodded slowly, absorbing every word like medicine he knew he needed. His uncle continued. You're taking a leave from work. You're staying here for a week. You're going to rest, reset, and rebuild. And most importantly, you're going to learn how to treat your mother with respect again. My son didn't argue, didn't complain, didn't protest. He simply nodded, eyes lowered, accepting the terms with a kind of relief, as though someone had finally lifted a burden he'd been dragging for too long. We had breakfast together after that. A simple meal, but for the first time in ages we ate in peace. Not the fragile, quiet peace of avoidance, but a new kind of peace built on honesty. My son looked different. Not fixed. Not healed. But different. Softer. Calmer. More aware. And yet, beneath that fragile calmness, I knew the biggest challenge wasn't his uncle's presence. It wasn't the consequences of yesterday. It wasn't even his guilt. It was the storm he carried inside himself, the unresolved resentment, the unspoken traumas, the disappointments he'd buried under years of pressure. And storms don't disappear overnight. They build. They expand. They wait. That afternoon his uncle sat with him in the living room talking for hours about responsibility, about manhood, about emotional control, about the weight men carry in silence. And I watched from the kitchen doorway, seeing my son not as the angry man he had been yesterday, but as the lost boy he once was, struggling to find a place in a world that demanded too much from him. Evening came, soft and golden through the windows, and for the first time in a very long time, my home felt like a home again. Not a battlefield, not a silent standoff, not a place where I tiptoed around his mood. A home. But deep down beneath all the calm, a quiet awareness lingered inside me. Every confession has a shadow. Every apology hides a wound. And every healing requires confronting the darkness that caused the break. And my son's darkness was far from done revealing itself. The next morning arrived with a strange blend of calm and tension, the kind that sits quietly in the corners of a house after a storm has passed but before the sky decides whether to clear completely or break open again. I woke up early, long before the sun had fully risen, and stood at the kitchen window listening to the comforting hum of the refrigerator, the soft ticking of the wall clock, and the rustling wind outside. For the first time in months I didn't feel afraid to move around my own home. My steps weren't quiet. My hands didn't tremble. And as I brewed coffee, I allowed myself to exhale a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. My son came downstairs a little later, his hair tousled, his eyes still heavy from a restless night, but there was something new about him, something softer, something humbled. He greeted me quietly, almost respectfully, and sat at the table without demanding anything, without expecting anything. His uncle was already awake, seated comfortably in the dining room chair like he owned the air around him, reading through some old newspaper clippings and documents he'd brought with him. There was something grounding about his presence, steady, unshakable, like a silent guardian keeping the house in check. My son hesitated before sitting next to him, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. The boy who always second-guessed himself, who looked for approval in every movement, who feared disappointing the people he loved. It wasn't weakness. It was vulnerability. The raw kind that men often hide because the world teaches them it's shameful. His uncle lowered the paper slowly and looked at him with a level gaze that stripped away every layer of defensiveness. "How did you sleep?" he asked. My son shrugged awkwardly. "I tried," he said. "My mind wouldn't stop." His uncle nodded knowingly. "That's because for the first time, you're facing yourself without excuses." The words hit him, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded in quiet acceptance. After breakfast, the two of them stepped outside to talk. I watched from the kitchen window as they stood in the cold morning air. My son with his hands shoved into his sweatshirt pockets, head down, and his uncle standing tall beside him, speaking with calm authority. Even from a distance, I could sense the heaviness of the conversation. The way my son occasionally wiped at his eyes, the way he took deep breaths between sentences, the way his uncle placed a firm hand on his shoulder when his voice broke. Painful truths were being brought into the light, truths my son had buried out of pride, fear, and shame. I brewed myself another cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the faint murmur of their voices through the slightly open window. After nearly an hour, they both walked back inside. My son's face was tear-stained but lighter, as though a weight he'd carried in silence had finally loosened. He sat down, running a shaky hand through his hair. "Mom," he began quietly, "I need to tell you something." His uncle placed a supportive hand on his shoulder but said nothing, letting my son take the lead. "I wasn't angry at you," my son continued, voice trembling. "I was angry at myself, angry at everything falling apart, angry that I kept failing. And I took it out on the only person who has always had my back." Tears slid down his cheeks, and he didn't bother hiding them this time. "I'm so sorry. I don't know when I became this person. I don't know why I thought treating you that way was okay." His words pierced me because for years these were the words I prayed to hear. Not to be right but to be seen. I leaned forward and gently held his hand. "You didn't become that person overnight," I said softly. "Pain shapes people. Pressure shapes people. But you're here now. That's what matters." His uncle nodded approvingly. "She's right," he added. "Admitting the truth is the hardest part. Most men spend their entire lives hiding from themselves. But you didn't. And that's the beginning of everything." But even in that moment of healing, I couldn't ignore the lingering tremor in my son's hands, the heaviness still shadowing his eyes. Trauma doesn't evaporate with one conversation. It lingers. It grows roots. Fights back. And sometimes it shows up in ways we least expect. We spent the rest of the day cleaning the house together. A task we hadn't done as a family since he was a teenager. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down the counters, fixed the squeaky cabinet door, and even repaired the loose hinge in the pantry. These small actions felt like peace rebuilding itself one gentle step at a time. But by late afternoon, his mood shifted again. Subtly at first. He became quiet, distracted, troubled. His uncle noticed it too. "What's going on in your head?" he asked calmly. My son sighed. "I keep thinking, what if I can't change? What if this is who I am now?" His voice cracked with fear, not anger. His uncle sat down across from him. "You're confusing guilt with identity," he said firmly. "Guilt is temporary. Identity is what you choose. And right now you're choosing change." My son nodded, but uncertainty still lingered. As evening approached and the sky outside darkened, something else surfaced, something none of us expected. While sorting through old boxes in the hallway closet, my son found a folded piece of paper tucked inside an envelope. He opened it slowly, curiosity fading into shock as he read. "Mom," he whispered. "What is this?" I stepped closer. It was a letter. A letter I had forgotten existed. A letter his father wrote before he died. A letter addressed not to me, but to our son. His hand shook as he unfolded it completely. And in that moment, the past walked into the room. The truth neither of us were prepared for was finally in his hands. My son held the letter as if it were something fragile, something alive, something that could shatter into dust if he breathed too hard. His fingers trembled around the edges, eyes scanning the faded handwriting with a mixture of fear, longing, and disbelief. His uncle watched him quietly, piecing together the significance even before the first words were spoken. I hadn't seen that letter in years, hadn't needed to. It was tucked away when he was still too young to understand the depth of what his father had written, and then life got in the way, grief got in the way. And eventually the letter became a hidden memory stored between old holiday decorations and boxes full of things I didn't have the strength to revisit. But now in his hands, it felt as though the past had chosen this particular moment to step forward. Not earlier. Not later. Now, right when he needed it most. He swallowed hard and began reading slowly, voice shaking but steady enough to carry the words through the room. "My son, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there to guide you the way I hoped I would. Life has a way of cutting moments short, but I pray you will grow to understand the man I wanted you to become." His voice cracked on that line, and he paused, blinking rapidly to clear the tears gathering in his eyes. His uncle looked down, jaw tightening. He too had loved my husband like a brother. I stood beside my son, close enough to feel the tremor in his breath, but far enough not to interrupt the bridge being built between a father and son separated by death but reunited through ink and memory. My son continued, "You will get angry. You will feel lost. You will make mistakes. But hear this clearly. A man is not measured by his temper, but by how he treats the people who love him, especially his mother." The words hit him like a strike to the chest. His breath hitched, and his hand went to his mouth as if trying to stop a sob from escaping. He walked a few steps away, clutching the letter, shoulders shaking. "He knew," my son whispered, voice breaking. "He knew exactly what kind of man I could become, and what kind of man I shouldn't become." His uncle approached him slowly, placing a hand gently on his back, a silent gesture of support, firm, grounding, and unconditionally present. My son wiped his eyes and continued reading. "If the weight of the world ever becomes too heavy, rest. Don't take it out on the ones who would give their lives for you. Pain is not an excuse to cause pain. And if you ever lose yourself, go home. Your mother will always be your compass." By the time he finished reading, tears were streaming freely down his face. Silent, uncontrollable, raw. He pressed the letter to his forehead, closing his eyes tightly as if trying to absorb every word straight into his soul. His uncle looked at me with a softened expression, one that acknowledged both the beauty and the tragedy of the moment. "He wrote this because he knew life would push you," his uncle said softly. "He knew you'd face storms, but he believed you would rise above them." My son nodded slowly, the letter trembling in his hands. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I don't deserve his faith or yours." I walked to him and gently cupped his face in my hands like I used to when he was a child afraid of thunder. "You don't earn a parent's love," I said softly. "You receive it, and you honor it by becoming better." He broke then completely. Not in anger, not in frustration, but in surrender. He wrapped his arms around me tightly, burying his face in my shoulder, sobbing with all the weight he had been carrying for years. All the unspoken guilt, all the pressure, all the shame. It poured out of him like a dam finally cracking open. I held him as tightly as my aging arms could, rocking him gently the way I used to when he was small and the world frightened him. His uncle looked away respectfully, giving us a moment meant only for mother and son. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet and swollen, but his eyes looked clearer than they had in years. "I want to change, Mom," he whispered. "Not for you. Not for Dad. For me." I nodded, my heart swelling with a tenderness I thought I'd lost. "Then start now," I said. "Start with honesty." He took a deep breath, sitting down slowly. "There's something I haven't told you," he admitted, looking from me to his uncle. His uncle straightened. "Go on." My son hesitated, swallowing hard. "It wasn't just anger. I've been dealing with something else. Something I didn't want to admit." His hands shook again, not from fear of us, but from fear of the truth he was about to reveal. I reached for his hand, squeezing gently. "Whatever it is," I whispered, "you don't face it alone." He nodded, closing his eyes for a moment. Then he finally said it. "Mom, Uncle, I think something's wrong with me. I've been having episodes, blackouts, moments I don't remember, mood swings I can't control." The room fell into a heavy silence. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't deflecting blame. He was admitting something far bigger and far darker than anger. And we both understood. This journey wasn't just about discipline. It wasn't just about respect. It wasn't just about regret. It was about saving him from something deeper than any of us had realized. The room went still after his confession, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from silence alone, but from truth hitting the air so heavily that even breathing feels different. My son sat there with his shoulders drooped, eyes red, fingers knotted together like he was holding on to himself. His uncle leaned back slowly, exhaling through his nose, trying to process everything. And I felt something sharp inside me. Fear, relief, sorrow, and a fierce protectiveness all tangled together. Blackouts. Mood swings. Episodes he didn't remember. No mother wants to hear those words. Yet every mother prays her child will trust her enough to speak them. His uncle broke the silence first. "How long has this been happening?" he asked, voice low but steady. My son rubbed his palms against his knees like he was scrubbing guilt off them. "A while," he admitted, staring at the floor. "Months, maybe a year." I kept telling myself it was stress or lack of sleep. But now I'm not sure. My heart clenched. A year. All the sudden anger, the unexplained outbursts, the hollow apologies he barely remembered. Pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know existed were suddenly fitting together. I reached forward and placed my hand on his arm. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked softly. He looked up, eyes filled with shame. "Because you already had so much on your plate," he whispered. "And I'm supposed to protect you, not scare you." I shook my head gently. "You're my son. You don't protect me from the truth. You let me stand beside you through it." He lowered his gaze again, swallowing hard. His uncle leaned toward him. "Have you hurt anyone else?" he asked. A long pause stretched across the room. My son shook his head. "No. Only that day. Only Mom." The words were soft, but they cut deep, not because they hurt but because they were honest. He wasn't minimizing, sugarcoating, or rewriting. He was facing it. His uncle nodded slowly. "Then talking was the right first step," he said firmly. "But now we need to figure out what's going on inside your head." My son laughed weakly, not out of humor but exhaustion. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted. "Half the time I feel normal, like nothing's wrong. And then something small happens and suddenly I'm someone else. Someone else." That phrasing chilled me. Anger I could understand. Pain I could understand. But feeling like a stranger inside yourself, that was something deeper, something heavier. I reached up and stroked his cheek the way I used to when he was feverish as a child. "Then we will start somewhere simple," I said gently. "We will get you help." He stiffened slightly. "Therapy?" he asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Counseling?" I nodded. "Maybe both. And maybe a medical evaluation too. Whatever it takes." His uncle folded his arms. "This isn't about something being wrong with you," he said. "It's about understanding what's happening so you can control it." My son pressed his lips together, nodding slowly but not confidently. He hesitated, voice cracking. "I don't want you to think I'm broken." I cupped his face between my hands. "Broken things don't ask to be fixed," I whispered. "Lost things don't ask to be found. You asked for help. Do you know how strong that makes you?" His eyes filled again, but this time the tears came slower, more controlled. His uncle nodded approvingly. "Your father struggled with things too," he added quietly. My son froze. "What do you mean?" The uncle hesitated, glancing at me. I nodded. "Tell him," I whispered. He sighed deeply before speaking. "Your dad. He had moments he hid from everyone. He got overwhelmed easily. Sometimes he shut down. Sometimes he looked like he was fighting something inside him." My son blinked, stunned. "I never knew." His uncle shook his head. "He didn't want you to. He didn't want you to carry worry on your shoulders while growing up." My son took a shaky breath. "So, I'm like him?" he asked. "Not in your worst moments," I said softly. "But maybe in your battles." He looked at his hands, absorbing the truth slowly and painfully. The uncle continued. "But here's the part you need to hear. He fought through it. He asked for help when he needed it. He learned to manage it. And he lived a full, loving life because of it." My son swallowed hard. The letter from his father suddenly felt even heavier, like a bridge between their struggles had been standing there all along, waiting to be discovered. Then he said something I'll never forget. "I don't want to hurt anyone I love. Not ever again. Whatever this is, I'm ready to face it." Those words were everything. A vow. Promise. A turning point. I took his hands in mine, squeezing them. Then we'll face it together, I said. This house doesn't abandon its own. His uncle added. We start with steps, not leaps. You're not alone for a single minute of this. My son nodded, wiping his face. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'm ready. And in that moment I knew. This wasn't just a moment of healing. This was the moment his life changed direction. Not because of punishment, not because of fear, but because of truth, love, and accountability. The sun outside had begun to set, painting the room in a warm amber glow. For the first time in months, maybe years, the house felt peaceful. Not perfect, not healed, but hopeful. And hope, after all we had been through, felt like a miracle. The morning after our long, emotional conversation felt strangely different, as if the house itself had shifted during the night. My son woke up quieter, more aware, like someone walking carefully across a bridge they once ran across without looking. He came down the stairs slowly, each step thoughtful. When he entered the dining room and saw me already awake, sitting there with an untouched cup of tea, he hesitated, like he wasn't sure if he should approach or retreat. But I looked up and smiled softly, and that small gesture seemed to give him the courage he needed to sit beside me. There was a gentleness in him that morning, one I hadn't seen in a long, long time. But beneath that gentleness was fear too. Fear that the peace between us was fragile. Fear that one wrong word might break everything we had just rebuilt. I reached out and rested my hand on his arm. You slept? I asked quietly. He nodded. Not well, but better than usual. That was enough for me. A few minutes later, his uncle joined us, carrying his phone and a sense of purpose that made it clear he had been planning things since dawn. All right, he said, taking a seat across from us. We need a game plan. Not someday. Today. My son tensed but didn't pull away. That alone was progress. His uncle began laying it out step by step: therapist options, evaluation clinics, support groups, routines to help him track his moods, and ways to recognize the signs before things escalated. My son listened carefully, absorbing every word with a seriousness I had never seen in him before. But then he said something unexpected. I want to tell my wife. The room froze. His uncle raised an eyebrow, surprised. I stared at my son, unsure if he fully understood what he was saying. His marriage was already fragile, stretched thin by stress, misunderstandings, and the pressure of a new baby. Telling her everything, it could heal things, or break them completely. Are you sure? I asked softly. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. I'm tired of hiding what I'm struggling with. She deserves to know who she's living with. And maybe she can help me too. His uncle leaned back, studying him. If you do this, you have to do it honestly. No excuses. No minimizing. My son nodded. I know. His voice cracked slightly. I don't want to lose her, Mom. I don't want to lose any of you. My heart ached at the vulnerability in his words. Then honesty is the only path, I told him. He took a deep breath. Can you come with me? He asked. Not as a man hiding behind his mother, but as a son trying to rebuild his life with support. I nodded without hesitation. Of course. We left shortly after, driving across town in silence, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full of fear, hope, and the weight of what was about to happen. When we reached his house, he paused on the porch, gripping the railing like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing. What if she thinks I'm dangerous? He whispered. I placed a hand on his back. You came to fix things, not hide from them. That alone makes you safe. Inside, his wife looked surprised to see us, especially together. She set down the laundry basket she was carrying and wiped her hands nervously. Everything okay? She asked. My son took a step forward. I need to talk to you, he said, voice trembling. Really talk. We all sat down in the living room. My son didn't waste time. He took a breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and began telling her everything. About the blackouts, the mood swings, the fear inside him, the moment he lost control, and the shame that had been eating him alive since. He didn't leave anything out, not even the parts that hurt him the most. I watched his wife's face shift: confusion, shock, hurt, sorrow, and finally a kind of heavy understanding. When he finished, she didn't speak at first. She just stared at him, tears filling her eyes. Then she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" He looked down. "Because I didn't want you to see me like this." She moved closer. "I already saw you losing yourself," she said softly. "But I didn't know how to reach you." My son covered his face with his hands and broke down, and she wrapped her arms around him, not out of pity but out of love. A deep, complicated kind of love that survives storms. His uncle stood quietly in the doorway, giving them privacy, while I watched the two of them hold each other like they were rebuilding something brick by brick. His wife wiped his tears and whispered firmly, "We're going to fix this. Together." When we left their house, my son hugged me tightly, longer than he had in years. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me." I held him close. "A mother's love doesn't disappear," I said softly. "It waits." Later that evening back home, I sat alone in my room and let everything sink in. The fear, the pain, the healing. I realized that what happened in that kitchen, the slap, the moment I stayed silent, was not the end of something, but the beginning of truth. Sometimes families don't break because of the hard moments. They break because they never talk about them. But we talked. We faced it. And now we were rebuilding. The house felt peaceful again. Not perfectly fixed. Not magically healed. But steady. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that tomorrow might actually be better than yesterday. Because my son was fighting for himself. Because we were fighting with him. Because sometimes love is not soft. Sometimes love is the courage to face the darkness together. Days passed, and slowly the tension that once clung to the walls of my home like a storm cloud began to lift. Not because everything was resolved, and not because wounds heal overnight, but because healing had finally begun. My son started attending therapy, real therapy, not the half-hearted attempts he used to make just to please me. After his first session, he called me while sitting in the parking lot, his voice shaky but proud. "It was hard," he said softly, "but I think I needed that more than I knew." I told him how proud I was, and for the first time in years he believed me. He began showing up more. Not just physically but mentally, emotionally. He came over with groceries one day, insisting he would cook. The food was barely edible, but I ate it like it was a 5-star meal because what mattered wasn't the taste, it was the intention. It was his way of saying, "I'm trying. I'm here." I didn't forget what I almost lost. Every so often he'd look at my arm, the one he had grabbed that day in the kitchen. His eyes would cloud with shame, and he'd try to apologize again. I stopped him each time. "We're moving forward." I would remind him gently. "Don't look back unless you're learning from it." And he would smile, a real smile this time. A smile that told me he was beginning to forgive himself. His wife became a quiet warrior in all of this. She attended joint sessions with him, sometimes waiting in the car, sometimes sitting beside him, holding his hand as he peeled back the layers he had buried for so long. Their home, once unstable and full of unspoken frustrations, gradually found its rhythm again. There were still difficult days, moments when his impatience surfaced, when old habits tried to claw their way back out, but those moments no longer spiraled into destruction. They talked. They paused. They tried again. They chose understanding over assumptions. One evening my phone buzzed. It was a picture from my son. Him sitting on the living room floor with his baby daughter asleep on his chest. Under it he wrote, "I want to be better for her." I sat there staring at the screen, tears blurring the image. Because that was the boy I raised, kind, loving, gentle. And beneath all the anger, pain, and confusion, he was finding his way back to himself. His uncle stayed involved too, checking on him regularly, pushing him when necessary, listening when needed, guiding without controlling. They were rebuilding their relationship as well, one that had been strained for years due to pride, misunderstandings, and silence. But now silence was no longer welcome in our family. Not the harmful kind, not the quiet that hides pain. One Saturday my son surprised us all by organizing a small family dinner at his place. Nothing grand, just simple food, laughter, and the warmth of being together without the tension we had grown used to avoiding. As we sat around the table, his wife leaned over and whispered to me, "He's different now. Softer. Stronger." I nodded, watching him playfully feed his daughter tiny pieces of mashed vegetables while she giggled. It was a scene I feared I might never see. A scene that felt like redemption. Later that night, when the dishes were washed and everyone else had gone to the living room, my son walked out onto the porch where I was sitting. The cool night breeze brushed past us, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and the soft glow of streetlights. He leaned against the railing, quiet for a moment before speaking. "Mom," he said gently, "I want you to know something." I turned to him, my heart steady but curious. "That day in the kitchen." He paused, swallowing hard. "I think about it every single day. And I know you say it's in the past, but I don't want to ever forget it. Not because of the shame, but because it reminds me of who I never want to become again." I reached for his hand and squeezed it. "You're not that person anymore," I told him. He looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "You saved me." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could hide it. "No," I said softly. "You saved yourself. I just refused to let you drown alone." He pulled me into a hug, tight, trembling, full of gratitude and love, and all the things he once didn't know how to express. And I held him like I used to when he was little, when his biggest fears were monsters under the bed, not the ones living in his mind. When I drove home that night, the city lights looked softer, almost golden. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. The house didn't feel heavy. The shadows didn't feel threatening. I wasn't scared of the future anymore because for the first time in a long, painful while, my son wasn't lost. He was fighting, healing, rebuilding. And I wasn't alone in the struggle. Weeks turned into months, and though life didn't magically become perfect, it became real, honest, stronger, grounded in truth rather than denial. My son thrived slowly, steadily. His marriage strengthened. His fatherhood blossomed. And our relationship transformed into something fragile yet powerful. Built not on fear, but on accountability, courage, and unconditional love. Healing isn't a straight line, but it is possible. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, but it is freeing. Family isn't perfect, but it is worth fighting for. And so the story that began with a hand raised in anger ended with a hand held in reconciliation. Not because the pain never existed, but because we refused to let it define us.